There's videos on things they take for granted. Many of these things you might take for granted. A lot of people take for granted that the police will take their report. A lot of people take for granted that if they're abused, somebody's going to be there for them. A lot of people take for granted that they're able to work. A lot of people take for granted that they don't go through so much abuse that it shuts them down. A lot of people take for granted that they get to see their friends and family even when things are going to hell. Like one woman, one of Lola Ty's victims, when she's overwhelmed, she does the same thing I used to. Go down to Pearl Street, find a familiar face, laugh and joke. A lot of people took for granted that I was there for them no matter what. But when I wasn't there for them, they weren't there for me. Amanda takes for granted that, well, most mothers, the things that she gets paid $11 per hour for, most mothers don't get paid $11 per hour for. They're expected to do that because they're mothers. And she lives with her mother. Most people who live with their parents would expect them to do those things. She typed stuff at me like if I washed my clothes, they'd be all over the kitchen. That's just ludicrous. Why the fuck would they be all over the kitchen if I washed my clothes? A lot of people take for granted the fact that they're not pegged as mentally ill. A lot of people take for granted that they're not homeless and abused every day. A lot of people take for granted that they can use a toilet or an outlet. A lot of people take those things for granted. A lot of people take for granted the fact that they're capable of working mentally. A lot of people take for granted that they're capable of working physically. A lot of people take for granted that their spouse works together with them. A lot of people take for granted that when somebody says that they'll help, they do. A lot of people take for granted that they have the money for a lawyer. A lot of people take for granted that they can use a bed and have a blanket at night. A lot of people take for granted that they have help that they're not willing to admit to. They just want to say they did it all themselves. A lot of people take for granted that they're not victimized for impoverishment. A lot of people take for granted that they're not homeless. A lot of people take for granted that they have good paying jobs. A lot of people take for granted that they have a second income coming in because somebody else in the household is working. A lot of people take for granted that they have decent roommates. A lot of people take for granted that they have parents that give a shit. A lot of people take for granted the fact that they're women, that there's a lot of services for them. A lot of people take for granted that they're not treated how I am. Normally, I don't get as overwhelmed by everything as I do now. A lot of people take for granted that their families jump through hoops for them despite the fact that they're addicted. Like Amy Witcher jumping through hoops for her husband. Or, Shannon Alvarado having her boyfriend there, living at the back end of her dad's house. It's basically two houses attached to each other. A lot of people take it for granted that their family is there for them when things go south. A lot of people take for granted that they're not abused. A lot of people take for granted that they never had to go through the things that I had to go through. A lot of people take for granted that they aren't traumatized by being assaulted repeatedly. A lot of people take these things for granted. You know, just a month before Natalie disappeared, I had to make a choice between living at Ken and Leah's and being able to see my friends because I lived at Ken and Leah's, or living at low income in Chapel, Nebraska. I was paying for both of them. A lot of people wanted to help but couldn't, but they kept wasting my time. A lot of people take for granted that they have the time. When I was up at Lantis, I did all that pacing because if I spoke, I got snapped at. The reason I didn't get snapped at all the time is because I kept my mouth shut. I took for granted that I could do manual labor. I was proud of that. I loved manual labor. A lot of people take for granted that they're not going through this. A lot of people. Teresa took for granted that her daughter loved her even though she's an alcoholic. Her and her daughter hadn't spoken for over 2 years until Brandy saw my face on the news. Teresa took for granted that I would listen to her. At Shannon's, I got to hear her stuff over and over and over again, and I remembered it. The things that I said to her over and over and over again, she kept forgetting. A lot of people take these things for granted. And I tell you what's going on, how it is for those of us who aren't there. You know, a lot of homeless people, a lot of people who are victims of abuse, they stuck up for me because they know that I'm telling the truth. They've been through it. But you won't listen to them. They're homeless, so they must be wrong. Their words aren't worth listening to. Or they're considered mentally ill, so they're not worth listening to. They're suicidal over all the shit they went through, so they're not worth listening to. You take for granted that even when you're wrong, your girlfriend's gonna stick up for you because she's your girlfriend. A lot of people took these things for granted. People took Natalie for granted. And me for granted. They thought that I was always going to be that happy Sean who was trying to make the world a better place. But then the abuse that I was going through prevented me from being that Sean. And I tried to be happy. I tried to go see them. You take for granted that you can see your friends. So many people said, well, I don't hardly ever get to see my friends. Yeah, but do you get to? Is it an extremely stressful situation, or do you get to do something positive? The Klang family, they took for granted the fact that they have that family and they get to go do things. They posted up on their Facebook about all their vacations they get to go on. They take that for granted. My dad takes for granted that his wife will take his side. See, my dad talked over me every time I tried to speak up there. And sometimes I ended up doing most of the talking. Alright, on one occasion, I got to do most of the talking. It's a 45-minute stint there where my dad, he kept on interrupting me, but he was sort of letting me speak. But I was overwhelmed with him interrupting me and having to deal with his assumptions. So I needed to take a break. So he got abusive because I needed to take a break. No, Sean, you need to do it now. You need to do it now. You need to do it now. No, Dad, you're overwhelming me. Please stop. Please stop, Dad. I asked him probably 30 times to stop. And then I left. I walked out the door while he's yelling at me, Sean, you get back here right now. No, Dad, I won't. When I got back, my dad wanted to talk to me. I told him only if he's willing to listen. He said, all right, I'll listen. So I started talking. And immediately he started interrupting me, believing that he already knows what I'm going to say, and he didn't. He was so completely wrong. And I'm like, Dad, please stop. Please stop and listen. He's like, Diane, back me up on this. People take for granted that they have the help that they need. That if something like this happens to them, that their family's going to be there for them. That somebody's going to listen. That somebody's going to take a look. I can't even get it all together and organized well enough to get someone to take a look because I'm in constant shutdown mode, and I've done a lot considering that. I've collected a lot of evidence, but there's no place for it to go. And a lot of people who offered to help, like Pierre, he takes for granted that he's young and good looking. He gets to see his friends and family. A lot of people take for granted that they have children that they get to see every day, or their husband that they get to see every day, or their wife that they get to see every day, or their mother. They take for granted that these people actually care about them. They take for granted the help that these people give them. The problem with the help in Montana is that it would have helped if I'd have been able to go back there and had friends there. But that's the most important part, is having friends who understand. And they went out of their way, still continue to go out of their way not to. They were pissed off because I didn't get on the bus when they wanted me to. They didn't understand that I love Natalie. And helping to find her killer was very important. Why is it that out of all of those press releases and press conferences, those officers never once told those people that I didn't kill her? And if you look at the things that I typed to her, I don't fit the criteria to be a stalker. I was begging for help getting the abuse to stop. I was overwhelmed because they wouldn't help get the abuse to stop. My friends wouldn't help get the abuse to stop. Joanna Taylor was trying.